Asia House conducted an extensive piece of research over the last 12 months on the future of trade. We spoke to more than 100 business leaders to get their view on the biggest challenges facing trade in the years ahead. Of most concern to all respondents was geopolitical tensions, and particularly the trade war between the US and China. And the consensus was that whomever won the US election, the tensions between the US and China would remain, they'd potentially grow, and business, governments, and trade would have to navigate through these tensions. Joe Biden's election victory has already seen a change in the tone of US foreign policy. He's proclaimed that America is back and wants to take a seat at the head of the table. The new president also seems more willing to engage Asia, and there is talk he'll appoint an Asia czar as part of his administration. This does not necessarily mean a change in policy towards China, but it may mean the US rebuilds relationships with traditional allies in an effort to counter the influence of China. So let's look now at geopolitics and get a sense of what 2021 will bring. I'm joined by Professor Tu Xinquan, Dean and Professor of the China Institute for WTO Studies at the University of International Business and Economics, and Ruth Herkes, former State Secretary at the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy, where she led Germany's global trade policy and EU and WTO trade negotiations. And Ruth now sits on a number of boards, including, I'm delighted to say, Asia House. And Noah Barkin, Senior Visiting Fellow, Asia Program, the German Marshall Fund of the United States. All of you, thank you very much for being with us. And Professor Tu, I'd like to start with you. The election of Joe Biden, does that change the whole outlook for US-China relations?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to join such a distinguished panel. I think I'm expected to talk about China's hopes on and its responses to the incoming Biden administration. First, I think I should congratulate President Biden as well as the American people. You know, actually, there are some Chinese wishing for the re-election of Mr. Trump because they believe Trump will further hurt the power of the United States and give China more opportunities to win the competition. But I do believe that the American people deserve a better, or at least a normal president. China should not place its hopes of its rise on the decline of the United States. Second, there are really strong and wide expectations among Chinese people that the new Biden administration would bring the bilateral relationship as well as the world order back to normal. By going back to normal, I mean that the United States should respect the existing international rules made by itself and put the US-China relationship back under the rules-based international system. What the Trump administration has done to China, to his own country and the rest of the world, has really destroyed the admiration for the US system and leadership, widely shared among Chinese intellectuals. As a trade guy, I just want to focus on US actions in trade area. The most ridiculous and notorious thing done by the Trump administration is to paralyze the appellate body of the WTO. While the US has been claiming to be the model of rule of law, it would go so far as to shut down the court simply because it cannot win in some cases. Actually, the US was already the worst member in implementing WTO rulings. Among 21 cases of requesting retaliation, 15 cases were targeted at the United States. Even so, we did not expect that the US would be so shameless to eradicate the court at all. I would not defend that the appellate body is perfect and right in all its judgments. But if whoever lost the case would kill the judges, where is the rule of law on earth? So my hope is that the new USTR should immediately allow the appointment of new AB members. The revival of appellate body would be my biggest expectation, or biggest immediate expectation on the Biden administration.
Okay. And Ruth Herkes, let me turn to you now. And one theory I've heard is that with a much more, I guess, outward-looking policy, a foreign policy of engagement, that a Biden administration will try to repair some strains with the EU, for instance, partly to try to counter the influence of China. Is that the sort of scenario you're looking at?
I think we are extremely hopeful to see a reset of what we used to call the US-European alliance. Signs of friendship and of an emphasis on the reset across the Atlantic, as you know, have been very strong. The president-elect is a friend of Europe. He has a lot of personal connections. I have no doubt that we will see a return to statecraft in our relations rather than heightened up tensions. And as we've just seen in recent days, the European Union has called for a new alliance with the US. It seems with quite a detailed work plan that would include things such as digital regulation that actually also pertain to China, defense spending, fighting the pandemic, a return to the Paris climate talks. Something we haven't touched on here yet is a return possibly to the Iran talks at the JCPOA, but also a broader call to counter the sort of the global rise of authoritarian power. So it's been dubbed a chance for a generation to renew the alliance. We will have to see to what degree that energy will be sufficient to also bring some important and needed energy into both EU-China trade talks, but also US-China trade talks.
Noah Barkin, good to see you again. The US policy to China, is it likely to soften, be more conciliatory under a Biden administration, or do you see any material change at all?
Well, thank you, Michael, and good to be here talking with Asia House. I think you mentioned in your introductory remarks earlier, we are going to see a change of tone in Washington. I think what we've seen under the Trump administration from people like Peter Navarro, Mike Pompeo, is pushback against the Chinese system. So a questioning of the legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party. Under Biden, I think you are likely to see pushback against Chinese behaviors rather than a questioning of the Chinese system itself. During the campaign, Biden conspicuously did not refer to China as an adversary. He calls them a competitor. So I think that may open the door to dialogue on areas of common interest, the pandemic, climate change, etc. But I think it would be wrong to expect a major change in the thrust of US policy. There's bipartisan support in the US for a robust approach to China. Biden has said he's not going to immediately dismantle Trump's tariffs. What he is going to do, and you mentioned this also, is make a concerted push with allies in Asia, but also in Europe. And I think a common front like this is absolutely essential if Western democracies are going to have any influence at all over China's behavior.
Professor Tu, is there concern in China that the Biden administration will take a more conciliatory approach to its traditional allies, the EU, for instance, Japan, and try to come up with a with a coordinated approach to China? Is that a concern? Is that being discussed in China?
Yes, there is a concern in China that the United States would work with its allies to make new international rules surrounding the China or with the exclusion of China. So some people argue that Biden is even more dangerous to China. This is, of course, not so constructive, but we cannot complain about it because this is their right and freedom. Actually, the current WTO rules were made without China. But China now is labeled as the largest beneficiary by his rule makers. And also, you see, the TPP was expected to set up a closed circle excluding China. But now, China has expressed the positive willingness to join its successor, CPTPP, excluding the United States. So, I think the process of China's integration into the international system has been steadfast but bumpy. So there will be some different ideas, some conflicts between China and the West. But as long as I think the fundamental precondition is that all should stick to the existing rules in the first place, and then try to reform the rules through various and possibly competing approaches. So I believe that as long as the competition is peaceful and equitable, we will finally find or construct a common ground for everyone.
And Ruth, on the common ground issue, is that where we're likely to see some movement over the next year or so? Climate change, for instance, health following the pandemic. Would Europe, Germany and Europe more widely be looking for cooperation and I guess a more positive relationship with China and between China and the US on those fronts?
Yes, I think we are. I think that's the name of the game, to find important strategic, even strategic areas of collaboration, be it fighting the pandemic, be it restoring global trade, attacking security issues. The point will be to what degree does that new spring, if I can call it that way, hold so that we also cross the bridge on contentious issues such as, to give a name to it, Huawei, digital control, the impact of some other features of China's economy, but also questions around security in Europe, etc. However, the fact that the incoming government in the US sees eye to eye with most of the participants in the Paris climate talks, and in particular, and importantly so with China, raises a lot of hope. And as I said previously, if there's sufficient statecraft, we may in fact get somewhere.
No, there are some areas where one might expect cooperation. The area where there's likely to be continued tension between the US is technology. Do you anticipate any thawing of relations there, or is that going to be the front for the trade war, really a tech war?
Well,
sorry, that was to no.
Sorry. You're talking about the tech war between the US and China.
Indeed. Is that where, I mean,
Okay.
even though there are areas where under a Biden administration, there might be a more positive relationship, climate change being a key one, a very obvious one. The divisions over tech and the concerns over tech, are they likely to ease off or in fact escalate?
Well, I think we're going to see a different approach with the Biden administration. The Trump administration's approach has seemed quite scattershot at times. I think what you're going to see from Biden, and I think he talked about this to a certain extent in his recent interview with Tom Friedman in the New York Times, is that they're going to take some time and put together a strategy. And technology will be a very important part of that strategy, but it's not going to be flailing around like we've seen under the Trump administration. I would expect technology to remain an issue, a very contentious issue in the US-China relationship. But I think there are big questions about whether a Biden administration would approach it in the same way. Question about its use of export controls, which the Trump administration has used to an unprecedented level, using the entity list and extraterritorial sanctions. Ms. Herkes talked about Huawei. I don't think we're going to see big changes in the U.S. approach to Huawei under a Biden administration. I think the big difference will be the U.S. getting together with allies in Asia and Europe and trying to develop a common strategy on technology.
Okay. Professor Tu, I want to turn to RCEP now, and that was signed a few weeks ago. 15 countries, a third of the world's GDP, and China's a participant in it. How significant is RCEP? So we can't hear you on mute, Professor.
Yes, actually, RCEP was part of the responses to the TPP, actually, in the early years. For China, because there was a fear that the TPP would exclude China and dismantle the regional integration in Asia. So China, and along with other countries, were trying to develop a regional agreement and to integrate regional value chains and the supply chains as a response to the TPP. Actually, this was not only China's idea. I think some ASEAN countries also shared this kind of concern. Right now, RCEP was concluded under such a difficult time, I mean, at such a difficult time after COVID-19 and also the US-China trade war. So I think for China and also other partners, RCEP will provide another opportunity for more economic integration and economic complementary cooperations, because what the U.S. government has done in the past few years has damaged, I think, has hurt all economies in the Asia Pacific area. So although sometimes some people argue that RCEP standards are not so high, but with such a large scale, and especially the cumulative rules of origin, I think RCEP already has provided a very big opportunity for the companies in this region to organize a very more coordinated and consolidated supply chains.
And Ruth, you've much experience in negotiating trade deals, and as Professor Tu said, the standards of RCEP are not seen to be particularly high. But is this, multilateral trade deals, are they now back on the table? Is this a significant deal that might transform trade in Asia and increase China's influence and integration in the region?
You're still on RCEP, yes?
Yes.
Yes, I think it's a formidable development. Because it not only brings into the fold the ASEAN countries, but also the other big regional economies such as South Korea, Japan, and importantly China. As to whether that new deal and grouping alliance will change global trade rules, it's too early to say. I'm optimistic that in the first instance, this will improve and dynamize, put some dynamism back into the regional trade, potentially influence China's trade behaviors, maybe globally. And it also is a testimony to the sheer geopolitical fact that the regional economies see fit to collaborate. And we should actually, it brings to my mind the fact that we should be able to do this in Europe too. And we've seen over the weekend with Brexit that we're far from having a smaller regional deal here.
Indeed. Noah, a final question to you. Noah, a final question to you. Is the US concerned about RCEP? Does it see it as an opportunity for China and Asia to integrate more closely and therefore pose a geopolitical threat to the US?
Well, I think if you're looking from Washington at RCEP, you have to be concerned. 15 countries coming together, including China. As we all know, the Trump administration pulled out of what was then known as TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership. Trade is a very difficult political issue domestically in the U.S. And I think, I don't think we're going to see a response in which the US rejoins TPP, or whether there's, I'm skeptical about a big push to revive TTIP, the transatlantic trade deal. It's just politically very difficult to do these big multilateral trade deals in the US right now. Should there be concern in Washington? Yes. Is there concern? Yes. But I don't think the Biden administration or Congress has come up with a real response to what is happening in Asia with RCEP. So we'll have to see what that response ultimately is.
Okay. We have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Noah Barkin, Professor Tu, and Ruth Herkes, thank you very much indeed. Really good to speak to you on behalf of everyone on the call. Thanks for joining us.